You kept quiet for so long, didn't you? You swallowed your voice, bit your tongue, convinced yourself that silence was strength, that maybe, just maybe, if you waited long enough, they'd come back. See your worth. Recognize the heart that never stopped beating for them even when theirs went cold. You made excuses for their absence, wrote poems for their betrayal and called it love. You sat in the shadows with loyalty bleeding from your chest, hoping one day they'd turn around and finally see the masterpiece they walked away from. But they didn't, and they wouldn't, because they mistook your silence for surrender, your patience for weakness, your loyalty for permission. Every time you stayed, when they gave you every reason to leave, you taught them how to ignore you. You trained them to believe you'd always be there, unmoving, unwavering, waiting like a statue, like a lighthouse with no ships to save. You stood at the edge of your own life, begging for a glimpse of theirs, and they never looked back. They were never scared to lose you, not because you weren't valuable, but because you made it too easy to be taken for granted. You were always the one holding on, always the one reaching out, the one who replied too fast, who forgave too quickly, who gave without asking. You handed them the keys to your soul and waited outside in the rain while they made themselves at home in your silence. They never earned the right to stay, but you never asked them to. You thought love meant patience. That time would prove your worth. That loyalty would win in the end. But time isn't a healer when the wound keeps getting deeper. Love isn't sacrificed when the other person doesn't bleed with you. And loyalty becomes a leash when the ones you love keep walking away with your heart and expect you to stay chained to the memory of what never really was. How many nights did you spend staring at the ceiling, wishing the phone would ring? How many times did you refresh your screen, waiting for a name that never lit up? You begged the universe for signs, for messages, for answers, but all you got was silence, and still you waited, not realizing that the silence was the answer, that their absence was the message, that the pain was the proof. You kept yourself small so they wouldn't feel insecure. You dimmed your fire so they could feel bright. You watered down your magic just to be digestible to people who were never meant to taste your brilliance. And all the while, you waited for them to notice, to remember, to love you back with the same intensity you gave. But here's the truth they'll never admit. They liked you waiting. They liked you in that cage. They liked knowing that no matter what they did, you'd still be there, soft, forgiving, silent. You became a safety net for their cruelty, a quiet corner where their guilt could hide. They weren't confused. They weren't busy. They weren't healing. They were comfortable with you carrying all the weight. Because you never asked them to lift it, they fed on your silence like wolves in the dark, ripping pieces from your soul, one passive-aggressive absence at a time. You gave them space, thinking it would heal something, but all it did was give them room to forget you. And still you waited for the apology, the closure, the explanation. But closure isn't something they give. It's something you take. And forgiveness? That's not for them. It's the freedom you owe yourself. You thought waiting was noble, that standing still made you strong. But standing still in a burning building doesn't make you brave. It makes you ashes. And you've burned long enough. You've buried too many pieces of yourself in the soil of their neglect. You've cried over doors that were never meant to open. You've written letters to people who never learned to read your heart. And now it's time to stop waiting. Because waiting is a slow death when no one's coming. It's a self-imposed prison, decorated with hope and delusion. It's the cruelest kind of loyalty, to keep showing up for people who've already left you behind. They thought you'd wait forever. They counted on it. They built their lives around the idea that you'd always be there, standing on the same corner of memory, waving with tear-stained eyes. They convinced themselves you had nowhere else to go, that you needed them more than they ever needed you, that your worth was dependent on their attention. But the truth they'll choke on when they finally look back, you weren't waiting, you were surviving. And one day, you stopped. You stopped checking your phone. You stopped replaying the conversation. You stopped hoping they'd turn around. You stopped wondering if you were enough. You looked in the mirror, saw the ashes, and decided to rise, not for them, for you. Because something in you finally screamed loud enough to silence the waiting. I deserve more. And in that whisper of defiance, you became unstoppable. They thought you'd wait forever, but they were wrong. You forgot them first. There were years you gave everything, and somehow ended up with nothing. You showed up when no one called your name. You gave when no one asked for your help. You stayed, even when every door was closed, every light turned off, every room emptied of warmth. You existed like a shadow, present, needed, but never noticed. They remembered you only when their world was on fire, when the silence they fed you suddenly felt too quiet for them to handle. You were their emergency exit, their last-minute prayer, their back pocket savior, but never their first thought. You watched birthdays pass where no one remembered yours. You sent messages with no reply, only to receive one-liners weeks later when they needed something. You gave time, energy, love, pieces of your soul stitched together like offerings, hoping that one day they'd see you, not just look at you, see you, feel you, understand what it cost you to be that constant, that dependable, that selfless. But they didn't, and still you kept showing up, like a ghost tethered to unfinished business. You floated through their lives while your own sat on pause. You clapped for their wins, even as your own dreams lay buried beneath the weight of theirs. You cheered when they reached the top, even though they never once looked down to see who boosted them. You were the wind beneath their wings, but wings were never offered to you. You were the soil they grew in, but no one asked what it felt like to be buried alive just to help others bloom. And somewhere in all of that giving, you disappeared. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, a little more every day, until one morning you woke up and couldn't recognize the person in the mirror. Your eyes held too many stories you never told. Your heart was heavy with words you never said. Your body remembered every time you swallowed your needs to accommodate theirs. And your spirit? It was tired, not weak, tired, from carrying the weight of people who never once offered to lighten the load. You became invisible by choice, not because you lacked light, but because you were always dimming yourself for people who couldn't handle your shine. You learned to make yourself small so others could feel big. You whispered so they could yell. You stepped back so they could stand in the spotlight. And they let you, over and over again, not once stopping to ask, "What about you?" The worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was watching them thrive while pretending you weren't the reason they made it. It was seeing them take your word, your love, your support, and hand it to someone else like it was their own. It was the realization that some people will bleed you dry and then blame you for being empty. You lived in their world but never belonged to it. You were always the background character in a movie you helped write, and maybe that was the most painful part, knowing you gave the best parts of yourself to people who were never meant to stay, knowing you offered your loyalty to those who treated it like a doormat, and every time you wanted to walk away, you heard that voice, quiet, trembling, tired, whisper, "But what if they finally see you next time?" Next time never came. Instead came silence, distance, more demand, more disrespect, and the heavy choking realization that you were never seen as a person, only a purpose, a utility, a tool, a means to their comfort. But here's the twist they didn't count on. Ghosts don't stay ghosts forever. One day the fog begins to lift, the shadows get tired of swallowing the light, and the ghost begins to remember who they were before they died in other people's stories. You begin to see that your worth was never in what you gave to them. It was in what you refused to give up from now on, yourself. The resentment started as a whisper, a flicker of rebellion, a tiny poisonous seed planted in the back of your mind. They don't deserve this. And for the first time, you believed it. You started seeing the cracks in the foundation. how you were always the one holding the house together, how they leaned on your strength but never acknowledged the toll, how they praised your silence because it made their selfishness easier to ignore. And in those quiet, ghost-like years, something powerful began to stir, a realization, a slow-burning truth rising like smoke from the wreckage of who you used to be. I was never invisible. I was just too powerful to be properly seen by small eyes. You stopped shrinking. You stopped apologizing for being the one who gave too much. You stopped pretending that your value depended on their recognition. And with every step toward that truth, you shed another layer of the ghost they turned you into. They never saw you, but now you're starting to see yourself. And once you do, once you truly see what you've become, what you've endured, what you've risen through, there is no going back. The ghost doesn't need revenge. The ghost needs resurrection. You kept believing they would come back, didn't you? Believing that one day they'd knock on your door with eyes full of regret and hearts full of apology, that they'd finally say all the words they never said, that they'd hold you, cry with you, explain the silence, admit the damage, ask for forgiveness like it was oxygen. You waited like a child staring out a window for a parent that never showed. You wrote redemption stories for people who had no intention of returning. You kept the light on, held your breath, and time kept moving. You built altars in their absence, sacred little shrines where you placed your loyalty, your patience, your hope, lit candles for every maybe and what if prayed in the language of pain, reciting their names like scripture. You believed if you loved hard enough, they'd feel it across the distance, that something inside them would shift, that they'd wake up in the middle of the night and realize who they lost. But they never did. They slept just fine while you lost sleep for years. They moved on while you stood frozen in place, chained to a version of them that only existed in your mind. The truth, they were never coming back. Not because they couldn't, not because they didn't know how, but because they never planned to. They left the moment they were done benefiting from your love. And still, you waited, because expectation is a dangerous drug. It feeds on fantasy. It paints monsters as misunderstood. It makes gods out of ghosts. And it kept you tethered to people who couldn't even carry your name with care. You thought they'd come back stronger, softer, sorry. But the apology never came. And if it ever does, it won't come for the right reason. It'll come because they miss your warmth, not because they understand the cold they left you in. It'll come when they realize no one else will love them the way you did, when their new world lacks the softness of your sacrifice, when their comfort collapses and they need a place to land. They'll call it a mistake. They'll say, I didn't know what I had. But the truth is, they knew. They just didn't care enough to keep it. See, they weren't evil. That would have made it easier to hate them, to move on. But they weren't monsters. They were indifferent. That's what hurt the most. They didn't leave because they had to. They left because it was easier, more convenient, less effort. They walked past your love like it was a puddle on the street, noticed it, maybe, but didn't stop, didn't kneel, didn't drink, didn't care. And still, you waited. You built temples to people who treated your soul like rubble, carved poems into your chest, hoping they'd read you one day. But they only ever read the parts that benefited them, only listened when your silence threatened their comfort. You thought your love could fix what life broke in them. But you can't pour into people who bring holes, not cups. You can't save people who don't want to be saved, because no one is coming to save you. That's the betrayal, isn't it? That somewhere deep down, you believed they would. That someone would show up, wrap you in understanding, lift you from your pain. That one day someone would look at you and say, I see you. I'm sorry they didn't. But no one came. No night, no savior, no rescue. Just silence. Just time passing. Just pain hardening into truth. And truth is a blade. It cuts clean, deep, merciless. The truth is this. You are your own rescue. You are the apology you've been waiting for. You are the closure. No one else can give it to you. Not in the way you need, because they were never built to carry your depth. never meant to reach those corners of you that begged for understanding. You gave them divine love, and they returned it with borrowed energy. And now the fire begins to flicker, because something inside of you has had enough. Enough waiting, enough shrinking, enough forgiving people who aren't even sorry. The fire doesn't roar at first. It crackles, a spark, a whisper, a single defiant thought rising from the ashes. I don't deserve this. That one sentence, so small, so dangerous, because once it enters your bloodstream, it spreads. It infects every memory, every excuse, every time you justified their absence or softened their cruelty. Suddenly you see it clearly, how you begged with silence, how you became easy to leave, how they were never held accountable because you did all the emotional labor for them, but not anymore. This is the betrayal of expectation, realizing that all along you were waiting to be saved from people you had to be saved from. They never failed you by leaving. They failed you by staying just long enough to make you hope. But your hope is no longer for sale. Your soul is no longer a waiting room. Your love, it's no longer blind. It sees with surgical precision. And what it sees now are the years you lost to people who could only take. The nights you cried for someone who never once considered your tears. The countless moments you gave to people who would never give them back. But it's not too late, because you're not just waking up. You're rising. You're beginning to walk differently, speak differently, breathe like someone who knows they've survived themselves. Your fire's not wild yet, but it's there, coiled under your ribs, patient, waiting. And every time you say no instead of okay, every time you choose yourself, every time you stop answering messages that only show up when you're useful, that fire grows. And one day, it will burn down every illusion you built about them. It will incinerate the temples you built in their honor. It will melt the chains of expectation until you no longer wait for anyone to validate what you've known all along. That you are powerful, that you are worthy, that you never needed to be chosen. You were the choice. And they'll return one day, perhaps. But by then, you'll be fire, and fire does not wait. There comes a moment, not with thunder, not with tears, not with anyone watching, but in the stillness, in the silence between distractions, when you finally look in the mirror and don't recognize the eyes staring back. Not because your face has changed, but because your spirit has. Because what stares back at you isn't broken, but it isn't whole either. It's a shape, molded by years of becoming who they needed you to be. You've been shape-shifting so long, you forgot what your real form looked like. You've worn so many masks: peacekeeper, forgiver, backbone, afterthought. You forgot the sound of your own voice when it wasn't bending. You used to laugh louder. You used to dream bigger. You used to feel things all the way to your fingertips. Now, your laughter's polite. Your dreams are quiet. Your feelings are folded into corners no one bothers to dust. And as you stare into that mirror, something painful presses against your ribs. A question too loud to ignore. When did I lose me? It's not a cry. It's a whisper. Not an explosion, but a slow, aching unraveling. You trace the timeline back and realize you gave pieces of yourself away like they were nothing. You watered everyone else and left yourself thirsty. You said yes when your soul was screaming no. You sat at tables that starved you. You stayed in rooms that shrank you. You bent, then broke, then pretended breaking was normal. You didn't even notice the moment you stopped being you, because it was quiet, because it was slow, because you were too busy surviving someone else's expectations to hear your own voice dying. You were loyal to a version of you that served others. The strong one, the understanding one, the one who always forgave, the one who stayed behind so others could run forward. And they loved you for it, not because they truly saw you, but because it was easier to love the version of you that made no demand. But that version wasn't love. It was sacrifice, and not the holy kind, the kind that leaves scars, the kind that empties you, the kind that makes you forget your favorite color, your deepest hunger, the sound of your own heart pounding for something more. So you look in the mirror, and there is grief there. Grief for the you who never got to be loud, the you who never got to rest, the you who kept showing up when no one clapped. But grief isn't the end. Sometimes it's the first sign you're alive again, because grief means you're feeling again. And through that grief, through that mirror, something shifts, something small, something sacred. A single choice rising like dawn. I won't live like this anymore. Not in bitterness, not in vengeance, but in truth. You don't scream it. You don't need to. It's in the way you exhale. The way you finally stop defending people who never showed up. The way you start asking questions that make your chest burn. What do I want? What do I need? Who am I if I'm not carrying everyone else? At first, the answers don't come easy. You reach for old habits like crutches. You almost text them, almost go back, almost apologize for things you didn't do, just to feel safe in the familiar discomfort. But something anchors you, the mirror, that quiet silver witness, because now, when you look, you see her, the one beneath the masks, the one with calloused hands and a tired soul, but fire in her eyes. You see the version of you who never asked for much, just for peace, for room to breathe, for space to be whole. And now, you're ready to give that to her. You start walking, not because you have a map, but because you finally stopped waiting. No more waiting for closure. No more waiting for apologies. No more waiting for permission to live your damn life. You walk away from conversations that drain you. You walk away from people who only call when they need you. You walk away from the identity you wore like a badge, the one who never quits on others, because now you refuse to quit on yourself. The mirror isn't kinder now, but it's honest, and honesty is a better foundation than fantasy. You start saying your name again, not as someone else's role, but as your own presence. You start doing small things that feel like rebellion, like eating alone without shame, like turning your phone off without guilt, like not explaining your every no. Every step feels strange at first, but then it starts to feel like coming home, and you realize you don't need to burn everything down to begin again. You just need to stop abandoning yourself. The fire they tried to tame, it's still there, and now you're turning toward it. You're not who you were, and thank God, because who you were was a reflection of their comfort, but who you're becoming, that is the mirror they will not recognize. That is the version of you that no longer waits. She walks, and she doesn't look back. You didn't scream. You didn't throw a scene. You didn't set fire to the bridges or send one final text filled with all the things they never listened to. You just stopped waiting, stopped responding, stopped defending, stopped trying to prove your worth to people who measured it in convenience. You walked away in silence, and it was the loudest thing you ever did. There's a sacred violence in walking away without a sound, because for so long, your voice was a siren song, begging to be heard, pleading to be enough, singing lullabies of forgiveness while your soul bled beneath every note. But not this time. This time, your silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. It was your final act of love for yourself. They didn't notice at first. They never do. They were used to your patience, used to the way you'd always come back, used to the way you carried the weight of their apathy like it was a crown. But then the silence stretched longer and longer and longer still. And suddenly, they felt it. The shift, the absence, the echo of something they thought would always be there, gone. They reached out, but your number wasn't blocked. Your door wasn't locked. You just weren't there anymore. Not in the way they needed, not in the way they were used to. You didn't lash out. You didn't explain. Because the truth is, when someone never heard your whispers, they don't deserve your thunder. They only noticed when their comfort cracked, not when your heart did. They panicked, not because they missed you, but because they missed the version of you that bent, the version that stayed, the version that made them feel powerful. But now, you were powerful, not loud, not cruel, but clear. There's a terrifying strength in clarity, in knowing what you will and will not allow anymore, in walking away not with bitterness, but with peace. Peace that feels foreign at first, Peace that tastes like guilt the first time it touches your tongue. Because you were trained to confuse peace with selfishness, to feel guilty for choosing yourself, to feel wrong for resting, to feel cruel for not picking up every call, every broken person, every mess you didn't make. But guilt is just the ghost of your old obedience, and ghosts lose power when you stop feeding them. So you sat in your silence. You felt the discomfort of peace, the ache of empty space, the awkwardness of not explaining yourself. And then it passed. And in its place, freedom. Not the kind you scream about, not the kind that posts poetic captions, the quiet kind, the kind where you wake up and don't dread the weight of pretending, the kind where your phone doesn't own you, the kind where you breathe, not shallow, not anxious, but fully. You start going places they never wanted to go. Start dreaming dreams they couldn't hold space for. Start becoming someone who no longer flinches at solitude. And they feel it, not because you punished them, but because you stopped giving them the parts of you they never earn. You stopped apologizing for being tired, stopped explaining your silence, stopped begging to be seen. You walked away, and that walk became your resurrection. No grand announcement, no revenge plot, just step by step by step into the version of you that doesn't shrink. They tried to reach back, didn't they? Tried to remind you of the memories, the laughter, the good times. But memories can't resurrect what disrespect buried. You remember now, not just the good, but the absence, the disappointment, the constant war between who you were and who they needed you to be. And now, you don't want to go back. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love you. There's a bitter sweetness in that, the kind that stings like fresh air in healing lungs, because you wanted it to end differently. You wanted them to rise with you, to grow, to become. But some people are only meant to be lessons, not lifelines. And walking away, without burning, without breaking, was how you passed the final test. The test that asked, will you keep betraying yourself just to keep the peace? And for the first time, you said no. And in that no came everything. The space to laugh from your gut again. The room to dance without explaining your rhythm. The courage to speak without rehearsing. This is what freedom feels like. Not fireworks, but a steady flame. Not applause, but alignment. They might call you cold now, selfish, heartless. Let them. They never understood your warmth until it was gone. Never saw your loyalty until it stopped showing up like clockwork. Never valued your presence until it became memory. But this journey, it was never about them. It was about you. About the moment you realized you could leave without bitterness. About the moment you stopped waiting for closure and became it. About the moment you learned that walking away doesn't mean you're heartless. It means you finally found your heart. So no, there were no goodbyes, because you don't owe one. Your silence said everything. I loved you. I waited. I gave you more than I had. But I refused to lose myself for someone who couldn't hold me. And now you walk, head high, feet steady, soul intact. And with every step, you remind the world you were never afraid to leave. You were just waiting for the courage to stop looking back. At first, the silence was deafening. It clawed at the walls like an unwelcome guest, haunting every corner of your day. The quiet after the walk away wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, the kind of quiet that echoed with voices that used to fill it, the kind of stillness that pressed on your chest like a question you didn't know how to answer. Now what? You were free, yes, but freedom isn't a cure. It's a canvas, and for a while, all you saw was the blankness, the void, the echo of people who once occupied every corner of your life, and then didn't. You woke up, and the phone didn't buzz. You ate dinner, and no one asked how your day was. You succeeded, and there was no applause. You cried, and no one came running. But then something shifted, not all at once, not like lightning. It came in the smallest of ways, like learning to breathe again after holding it for too long. It was in the way the morning light hit your floor, and you noticed. It was in the stillness of your own breath, uninterrupted, unjudged. It was in the first moment you laughed, alone, and didn't feel the need to share it. That was when it started, the rebirth. Not because someone returned, not because someone new arrived, but because you did. You returned to yourself, to the body you had abandoned trying to be enough for others, to the soul you'd buried beneath everyone else's needs. You stopped filling the silence with distractions. You stopped answering ghosts. You stopped running from yourself, and you sat in it, in the rawness, in the ache, in the unbelievable beauty of solitude. And something strange happened. The silence softened. It stopped sounding like loneliness and started sounding like you. You heard your own thoughts without judgment. You felt your own rhythm without rushing. You started remembering the things that made you, you before the world told you who you had to be. The books you used to get lost in. The songs that felt like home. The dreams that made your chest swell before they made you tired. The hobbies, the hopes, the hidden pieces. They came back to you, shy at first, like animals long caged, unsure of freedom. But you fed them, you watered them, you nurtured them like a garden no one could trample this time. And for the first time, you fell in love with your own company. It wasn't loud, it wasn't Instagram worthy, but it was real. You cooked for yourself, not because someone was coming over, but because you deserved flavor. You cleaned your space, not for appearances, but because you were worthy of living in peace. You went on walks without needing someone to walk beside you. You took pictures without needing anyone to see them. And slowly, the fear that solitude was a punishment melted away, because it wasn't a cage, it was a cocoon. You weren't being left behind. You were being reborn. Piece by piece, you gathered the fragments of your worth from the ruins. You rebuilt your home from the inside out. You stopped wondering if they'd come back. You stopped checking your phone for a name that used to set your heart racing. You stopped rehearsing conversations that would never come, because you realized you don't need closure when you've chosen clarity. You don't need them to say sorry when you've already said enough. You don't need anyone to come save you, because you already saved yourself. That's the thing about solitude. It doesn't kill you.